Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to episode number 145 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, par usual, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States. That's Gary Action Jackson. And longtime listeners of this show know that we love classic rock and hard rock and prog rock and heavy metal and early MTV, stuff from the 80s from when we grew up. But part of growing up in the 80s was getting a healthy respect for the 60s. As 20th and 25th anniversary things started to become common, and two young rock and roll fans who were starting to discover more about the blues and its role in building the animal that we love called rock and roll, we started to explore stuff from the past. And thanks to the CD being a great way to store and release a ton of music, box sets became popular. And in the late 80s and early 90s, some of the best box sets, CD box sets, came out. And the one that really turned me on was Eric Clapton's Crossroads, because it took everything that Clapton had done, from the Yardbirds to John Mayall to Cream to Blind Faith to Delaney and Bonnie to his solo stuff, Derek and the Dominoes, all the way through the 80s with soundtrack stuff, B-sides. It was 4 discs. But the first disc, which was his Yardbird days and his John Mayall kind of early blues days, a lot of those songs were so short. There's like 25, 30 songs on a disc. And that really introduced me to the Yardbirds and hearing this blues that's basically the basis of Clapton's career. Well, then I come to find out, well, the Yardbirds are a pretty darn good band. And then when Clapton left, who they get? Oh, they got Jeff Beck. Oh, really? Goodness gracious, that must have been an amazing band. Well, it didn't last long because then they got Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page in the band, you got to be kidding me. So there was always this, I don't know, air about the Yardbirds, right? They were this band that had been gone at that point a very long time. We're in the late 80s. They'd been gone for 20 years, but still had this mysterious yet regal legacy because they had all these amazing guitar players who went on to do extraordinary things. Well, the things they did in the Yardbirds were really great, and for the 5 or 6 years they were together, they worked hard. They released a lot of singles, they did a lot of touring, and they evolved from a blues band to more of a psychedelic and pop band because they had all this great talent. It was always Keith Relf on the vocals. It was always Chris Dreja, at first on guitar, then he switched to bass after Paul Samwell-Smith left as bass player, kind of got into the production management side, but the drummer was always Jim McCarty. And Jim McCarty is joining us today to talk about his new single, Breath of the Wind. But of course, we're going to talk about his whole career, and we're going to get into some Yardbird stories. And we are so excited about that. He is a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, our second member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to appear here on the Ugly American Werewolf in London after the great Steve Hackett. And I don't know if the two teenage rock fans, me and Jackson, if you told us 30 plus years ago when we first got together and we were listening to the Crossroads CDs and we're getting into the Yardbirds that one day we're going to be interviewing a member of that band, I don't know if we would have believed you. But here we are. We're really excited about it. Can't wait to give you a listen to his new single, but also talk about all those great songs. Heart Full of Soul, For Your Love, Over Under Sideways Down, Happening 10 Years Time Ago, I'm a Man. They did a great I'm a Man cover, Mr. You're a Better Man Than I. Great rock songs from the original British Invasion. And well, we're going to jump into it here with Jim. First, we got a little bit of business to take care of. As usual, we always mention we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network of about 100 different music shows. Not all rock and roll. There's really something in there for everybody. You can follow them at Pantheon Pods on socials or go to pantheonpodcast.com to learn more about it. And we love our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Guys, if you want some of those original Yardbird singles or records or some of the stuff that's come out recently, imports from around the world, rarevinyl.com has some of them. They keep them in great shape. They ship all around the world. Use the code UGLY. You can save 10% off your orders. But here's the thing. They've got a lot of everything at Rare Vinyl. They've got over 250,000 items in stock. They've been doing this for 40 years. So you could go find a real treasure, something you've been looking for a long time, whether it's Yardbirds, whether it's classical. I've seen some people get Taylor Swift albums on there. Whatever you're into, go to rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY. Save yourself 10%. Now back to Jim McCarty. Such a pleasure for us to talk with this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member, this legend from a legendary band like the Yardbirds. We would talk about, Illusion. We would talk about some of the other stuff he does. And I think you'll find that his new single, Breath of the Wind, which we give you a little taste of here, is a beautiful song. He has a lovely voice. It's not rock and roll. It's more folk kind of thing with his guitar, but it's beautiful. And he collaborated with Hugh Syme, who is also a part of the Pantheon Podcast Network, to make it a lovely song which you can download on September 15th. So without further ado, let's talk to Jim McCarty of the Yardbirds here on The Wolf. So, look, we've talked before about how getting that Clapton Crossroads box set in high school was a real introduction to the Yardbirds for a lot of people our age, people of our generation, right? Because that comes out in 88. We're like 14, 15, 16 years old. We know who Eric Clapton is. We knew who Cream were. But all of a sudden we get this like, oh, wow, he was in this cool blues outfit. And then, oh, wow, Jeff Beck replaced him. Like, oh, wow, Jimmy Page replaced him? Holy mackerel, man, this is the super group of all super groups. What was your kind of intro to the Yardbirds back in the day?
I think that's what it had to be that. And I think maybe I'd heard the name before, like kind of it somewhere around, like, it mentioned with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and there was this other band, the Yardbirds, and you're right, it had those three guys come out of it. But I think it had to be, what was the big one? For Your Love was on Crossroads, right?
For your love, for your love, for your love, I'd give you everything and more, and that's for sure.
Right. So, yeah, they were a blues kind of band, right? And
when Clapton was there, yes.
Right. And then they decided to do For Your Love because it was a little poppier and maybe a little more psychedelic. And then Clapton's like, no, this isn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pure blues purist, right? I'm a blues purist, so I'm getting out of here. And of course, famously went on to the Blues Breakers with John Mayall and John McVie, but he didn't want to leave until he had a replacement, and that replacement that he had in mind just happened to be a guy named Jeff Beck,
who took them to a different genre altogether, I guess.
Yeah, and I kind of want to see what Jim's take on that is, because obviously they kind of started to go in a little more poppy, more psychedelic way when Clapton was in the band. Like, that was kind of a band decision, or was that management, or who, what was that really all about? Because then, yeah, the Jeff and the Jimmy years, they are a little bit more psychedelic. I mean, was Keith Relf an important piece of that? And what role does Paul Samwell-Smith play in this? Because he's part of the band, but then he kind of gets into management and producing. That doesn't happen all the time.
And the other thing we have to remember too is that, you say, well, Eric Clapton, Beck, and then Page, but they were just kids. I mean, it wasn't like Jeff Beck came in and said, I'm Jeff Beck and here's what we're going to do. No, he was some greasy kid who worked on cars and could also play the guitar. So yeah, you're right. Well, I don't think that he came in and said, this is what's happening. So it'd be interesting to see how what the progression was. And then, there were other factors in there. Your friend and mine, Mickey Most, comes into the picture again.
Right.
So that's a whole thing with, him trying to direct the band and that not going well. And then the whole thing just I think everybody just kind of got tired of it, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And well, I mean, look at their schedule, man. I mean, it was Page in the band a year, or maybe 18 months or something like that. They did 4 different tours of the United States. Not to mention tours of England and tours of Europe, and
right.
And did they go to Australia? I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Did they go to Japan? I'm not sure. Jim could probably enlighten us on something like that. It probably made sense at the time. Like, well, we got to capitalize, right? So we're going to do tour and tour and tour and record and tour and tour and record. Crazy schedule for 5 or 6 years of their lives. Insane. They would never do that today. Nobody would.
Right. And there was an interview he was talking about doing. Jim was talking about doing a tour like Dick Clark. Something Dick Clark presented this deal, and he was like, yeah, these bands didn't even go with the music that we had. It was terrible. It was put together poorly. So yeah, just that grueling, go, 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 go. We also remember too, I mean, it's kind of a pain to get around in the United States in 2023. In 1965, you were on a bus doing 48 miles an hour or whatever it could do back then. And trying to navigate going through the whole United States of America must have been at first probably really exciting, and then yes, a huge drag after that.
Yeah, and then I mean, it must be exciting, especially after you grow up in kind of war-torn UK, to be able to come to America where everything's in Technicolor, and you get to go to California where everything's fantabulous and there's girls and all that kind of stuff. But what was it really like? Because I mean, the US was very divided back in the 60s. I mean, kind of not unlike it is today, to be honest with you.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I'm sure they did great up north. And how did they do in the South? Because they like blues music, but I mean, did they have to play segregated venues? Did they stay away from them altogether? I don't know.
Yeah. Although as a kid, I mean, I'm guessing he's probably the same age. So, in that early 20s, to be able to come here to this place where all of your heroes came from. I mean, these guys grew up on, Gene Vincent and Buddy Holly. And, I'm sure I didn't hear Elvis thrown around, but that probably was an influence somewhere. And the blues guys, and to be able to come here and play in front of an American audience, and I think they were received better here than they were in the UK.
And that happens sometimes, and that's a big part of our show, right?
Right.
I mean, people who make it on one side of the Atlantic, and maybe they don't on the other, even though it might be their hometown on the other. They just seem to do better in the United States for whatever reason.
I was going to say, it seems to me like the more that you get into this band, the more you think, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but the legacy is kind of the three guitar players, but there's really a lot more going on, and they were a lot more influential than I think they get credit for, because they didn't continue into the 70s like the Stones did, and then into the 80s. They were they just had that about 5-year run with the three different guys before they broke up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there was a lot of talent in this band. I mean, Jim alone, he's not quote unquote just a drummer. He can write songs, he can sing, he plays other instruments. Chris Dreja, he played guitar, and then they switched him to bass, and he did that very well. He could sing a little bit too. Keith Relf was a very good harp player, man. I mean, probably better than Jagger, I would say. Certainly in the 60s he was. Mick picked it up pretty well, pretty adeptly. I do give him credit, but I don't think he was as good as Keith, in their heyday.
Yeah.
In the 60s there, So, yeah, there's a lot of talent in the band. But, I mean, the thing is, in 1964, no one thought a band would last more than 2 years. I mean, they're like, okay, Beatles, when is this going to be over?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, when is this going to end? Because this is teenage pop nonsense. And it just doesn't last that long. And so the fact that they lasted 5 or 6 years is actually kind of amazing. But like looking back now, I was like, oh man, it was only like 5 years, because now we're like used to, bands could go on 50, even 60 years, whereas back then, like, if it goes 18 months, that's pretty impressive. And then you can go get a real job.
and Jim did talk about that. And I want to get into perhaps quickly what he was thinking of doing at one point in time, because it wasn't rock and roll. So I'll ask him.
Well, he was in art school like all the other reprobates, right? Like, well, I don't really want to get a job. I don't want to go to formal university. Why don't you go to art school? Yeah, that sounds great,
I can draw.
Yeah, I can draw stick figures, and then in the meantime, I'll play some instruments and hit on some girls who are also in art school, It doesn't sound so bad, but I mean, like that's what Clapton would say. It's like, yeah, man, you go to art school because, beats getting a job, and, there's girls there, so.
Yeah. One thing that I think we do need to get into is just, how the transition, even though these guys were still young, I think they're bringing them on. They were very different people, all three of them. So it'd be interesting to see how the progression, bringing different people in, changed the dynamic of the band and kind of changed how they saw the world and how they wrote songs.
Yeah. But first, I want to get into that after. First, I want to get into his new track,
Right.
Breath of the Wind. Which is, I mean, it's a horrible thing that he went through in losing his love, but he's been able to kind of turn that sadness, that negative, into something pretty beautiful and positive. I mean, that's the gift of being a musician, the gift that we both wish that we had. True.
Yeah, and absolutely, 100%. You have it really is a gift to have these feelings that you can express in something other than just words, like crudely put together words for us. So and I think it does help people too that are maybe in the same situation. You can listen to this and feel kind of a bond with him.
Well then, Misty, you're a better man than I. Yeah, Misty, you're a better man than I. Oh, Misty, you're a better man than I. Yeah, Misty, you're a better man than I.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a positive thing to put that out into the world, if you ask me. I mean, you just say, well, this is my pain and I'll deal with it in my own way. She was special to me. It's got nothing to do with you. But then, you write a song like this. So you put out there, she's not 100% gone because of this,
Right. There will always be a part of her that is with him wherever he goes. And I've watched a couple of interviews with him, and he just does seem like a very positive person.
Mm-hmm.
He was a big part of the Yardbirds, not just the drummer, like you said. Mm-hmm. But he always seems okay to talk about other people besides himself.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Steve Hackett, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Hello. How are you this morning? Well, it's afternoon for you, I suppose.
Yes, I'm very good, very well, thank you. It's a nice bit of sunshine today.
Well, good. Well, hi. My name's Mac, and this guy over here or down here, depending on where your screen is, that's Action Jackson from the East Coast of the United States.
Oh, okay. Great.
Thank you very much for being here.
I think I recognize you. I've seen you before, haven't I?
Well, we've never spoken together before, but, you've spoken to some of our friends. You've been on Vintage Rock Pod with our friend Paul Stevenson before, and we've certainly been on his show before. So
okay.
That could be
great.
it. Yeah. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. And of course, we want to talk about your new single here a little bit, but are you living in France now? Is that right?
Yes, I'm down in the south of France, in Provence, about an hour up from the coast.
Very nice. And how long have you lived in France?
I've came here with my wife probably about 20 odd years ago.
Wow. Okay.
Gotcha. But we weren't in the same place. We moved from another place that was further inland.
Well, and you mentioned your wife Elizabeth, who I believe you call Lizzie, who is the inspiration for not only your most recent book, but this beautiful song that you've written here, Jim, Breath of the Wind. It's a credit to you, and I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I have to give you a lot of credit that you didn't just kind of take that loss on internally and say, look, I lost someone special to me and it's my pain and you don't need to know about it. You've made something very beautiful. This is a beautiful song that you're putting out into the world here.
Yeah.
And kind of keep her spirit alive a little bit. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Well, yes. It was a great blow, of course. And I immediately thought, well, she has to be around somewhere. She can't just disappear. So I looked for various signs, and certain signs happened. Somebody saw her one day, walking with me as well.
Sure.
Which she'd already passed on, and which was interesting. And then I got into watching YouTube videos on near-death experiences and getting a bit into mediumship. And I studied mediumship under Suzanne Giesemann, who's an American medium, who's very good. And I started to be able to communicate with Lizzie myself. So, using the steps that she showed me, Suzanne, which were quite simple in a way, I started to get signs from her and started to, read things in my mind and lots of things happening. And I actually had a session with Suzanne one time. And of course, Lizzie came into the session. And wow. she told Suzanne, he's actually written me a song. And Suzanne said, oh, yes, I've heard you've written a song for Lizzie. I want to hear it, So I had a rough demo of it, and I sent it to her. And Suzanne loved it, and then I sent it to a friend over in the States who took a long time, actually, before he managed to arrange it. And he came back with a fantastic arrangement, probably a year or so later. And then I spoke to Demon, and Demon said, we'd like to release this. So there you go.
Here she comes on the breath of the wind. She's sending me a deeper sound. Riding along on the butterfly wing, she's telling me she's still around.
no, it's beautiful. I'm glad you did. Of course, that friend that you mentioned is Hugh Syme, who's probably best known for his cover artwork, but he's also, I wouldn't call him a label mate. We're part of something called the Pantheon Network of music shows of about 100 different music-related podcasts, and he's got one with a couple of his buddies in Indiana now. He's a wonderful man, as I know. How did you come to know Hugh? And, what was it said? Well, I think I'll get this to Hugh and see if he can help me.
Well, I actually met him in Toronto because at one time my wife and I used to go regularly to Toronto, and I used to record up there.
Okay.
And the last album I did, a solo album, was a few years ago, about 5 years ago.
Walking in the Wild Lands?
It was produced by Terry Brown. And of course, Terry and Hugh know each other through the Rush connection.
Of course.
And Hugh did a couple of arrangements for me then, and they were really, really great. So he's really got a wonderful feel for arranging, for my songs.
Walking in the wild land, free of all pretenses, the sights and sounds filling up my senses. Half of the time we're not aware what's going on.
Well, that's excellent. We hope to have him on to talk about that here soon. So it's interesting that you mentioned that you've been kind of the spiritualism and working with the medium. Has it changed your view of your own death or the way you would transition in the future?
Yeah, completely. I've had a complete I've really had a complete makeover because I was always interested in this sort of thing, the paranormal. But suddenly when you get faced with it and you're hit with it like this in your life, it made a complete, it was a complete new life for me. And I'm sort of progressing more and more each day into that.
And does it take away the fear or I feel like everyone fears death on some level, some way or another, but
yeah,
has it kind of removed some of that for you?
Well, there's always the thought, I'm going to be with Lizzie because I know she's there. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced of that. So I guess the fear is sort of within us all, that fight or flight or whatever. Nobody really wants to die, do they? But
correct.
It makes that thought much easier, I must say.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept you bring up because I think that's part of it is, you feel like you're going to leave people behind. And if you have that connection, then it might be a little easier because you can have them with you, even though they have moved on.
Well, that's right. Yes. And that I feel, if I transition, I really believe she's going to be there for me almost straight away. This is what I hope. This is what I'm told. So that makes the thought very nice.
Yeah.
But of course, you've got the added thing of all the pain or whatever you have to go through, to die.
Well, let's transition to something more about your music here. I mean, I want you to educate our listeners. We're American, obviously, me and Jackson. I lived in London for a while. That's why the name of the show is The Ugly American Werewolf in London. I actually lived about 6 blocks from Abbey Road Studios. And I mean, a lot of people, when I say I'm going to speak with Jim McCarty, he's like, oh yeah, he was in the Yardbirds. I'm like, well, yes, he was, but that was a long time ago. He's been busy since then. Trust me, he's been, called Renaissance. He's had his own bands over the years, and like if you talk about a little bit about like Walking in the Wild Lands and some of the stuff you've been doing recently.
Well, yes, I've progressed to different bands, and of course, Renaissance was another famous band that I was involved in, and Illusion just had a box set out recently, and then I've done solo projects on myself. Walking in the Wildland, as I said before, Walking in the Wildland was recorded in Toronto, and I did another album called Sitting on the Top of Time, which was also recorded there. But I still play. The Yardbirds still get to play now and then, and we're actually on the Flower Power cruise again next year, which is going. From I think we're on from Puerto Rico to Miami. We're one of the bands on. It's in March, I believe. We did it this year as well. It's always great fun. And I work with an American band now, so they're all great musicians.
That's exciting. That's a new kind of a new concept. The cruises where you're on it, but you also get to kind of get a little bit more time with the people there. It's not just a one concert and then you're out deal. Do you enjoy being on these cruises?
Yes, I love it actually, because there's a great energy with everybody. Everyone's very friendly, and you get to meet a lot of fans, and also you get to see a lot of other groups. And I went to see Peter Asher this time, who had a great show, Peter and Gordon. And he had a great show, and he went through his whole history with Peter and Gordon and the Beatles and James Taylor, Linda Ronstadt. Wow. So it's great because you get to see some other bands as well, and it's all very comfortable.
It's almost like you're on vacation too, a little bit.
In a way, and you don't have to travel, you don't have to get back on the bus again and go somewhere else. You just go to your cabin.
What would you tell us about Keith Relf? Being that we were born in like 72, 73, Keith was gone before we had a chance to really see any of his solo work. Of course, we've gotten into it now, and I've got a little something here. You may know some of the songs on this album,
Yeah.
Tell us about Keith in your own words.
Well, Keith and I were very close. We'd share hotel rooms together, and we'd do lots of chatting. Half the night we'd stay up chatting about weird and wonderful things. And he was great fun, and he was quite an intense sort of guy, but a great performer. He really did go for it when he sung. And of course, he had a big handicap. He only had one lung most of his career.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. He had a lung removed early on.
Wow.
And he had asthma and emphysema as well, and playing the harmonica. Must have been difficult, but he had a good voice, very distinctive voice, and he had good ideas at creating songs, and we did some good songs together.
That's for sure. And he was a hell of a harp player. I mean, he could blow that thing awfully well. I didn't realize he did it with one lung. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. He was handicapped, but he really overcame it. He really expressed himself really well.
And then you were in Renaissance with him. And his sister Jane, I didn't realize in doing research, I never realized that his sister was with you as well.
Yeah. She was in the Renaissance lineup, the Renaissance lineup, and also in Illusion with me. And after Keith had died, and she was a very good singer too.
Runs in the family, I suppose. Yeah. And how about you as a singer, man? I mean, I know. Look, when you're in the '60s, you have the singer up front, and you're behind the kit, right? So they don't have you singing much. I don't know if you did any backup singing live or anything like that, but you're a fine singer. Did you ever say, hey guys, how about letting me step out there? It's like, no, look, Keith's got this, you can sing on something else.
Yeah, I did actually slip in a couple of leads. I think Happenings 10 years time ago. I sang along with Keith on the lead in that. And of course I'd sung, For Your Love and Heart Full of Soul and the backups. But I sing a couple of songs now with the band. I did The Box of Frogs back where I started, which is a great song to sing. And my voice is really meant to be more of a folky type voice, more ethereal. So that's what I prefer. But I love singing, and I enjoy it a lot.
10 years time ago, situations we really know, but the knowing is in the mind, sinking deep into the well of time, sinking deep into the well of time.
Well, you are a fine singer, and I guess I didn't realize that, right? And you start to do research like, oh, we're going to have Jim on. I better get to know all his stuff pretty well. I'm like, well, he is a fine singer. Now, you're not a rock, stand up front, like that kind of singer, but your voice is wonderful and it's a good accompaniment to the kind of music you've been making lately.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I always enjoyed Paul Samwell-Smith, the bass player. We were at school together and we used to sing all the Everly Brothers harmonies, and so I like that. All the harmony stuff, and I make sure I get a lot of that in when I do my solo thing.
Well, you mentioned the song Box of Frogs. I guess I hadn't realized, I realized it later in the 80s, that you kind of reformed the Yardbirds in the 80s, called it Box of Frogs, and the CDs are, they're a little bit of a collector's items when you go find them and pick them up. How did that come about, and what was the experience like?
Well, I think the three of us, that was Paul Samwell-Smith and Chris Dreja and myself, we were sort of seeing each other a lot. We had ideas together still, and we started to write some songs.
Okay.
And we just very slowly came back into it and built up the idea of doing another album and bringing in John Fiedler from Medicine Head, and Jeff of course played on a lot of tracks on the first album, and we called it Box of Frogs because it wasn't really the Yardbirds, so we wanted to use other people playing for famous guests, and Rory Gallagher and Steve Hackett and people like that played along, and so that was a good fun project. I think what happened with that was it was a shame we never actually toured. We never actually played live, which was a shame because we had a couple of good albums going there.
Yeah. Absolutely. They're great. And for our listeners who haven't heard the Box of Frogs records, go check those out. It's good stuff.
And we've had that discussion a couple times on this show, when bands kind of reform and they use the original name, where's the cutoff? It's not, are you trying to capitalize on the name, or is this something new? So it is interesting that you chose, we're not going to do the Yardbirds. We're going to do Box of Frogs. It's going to be a new thing. And then it can kind of take on its own life. It doesn't have to conform to anything old. It can be brand new.
Yeah, that's it. And it sort of did that in a way. It sort of had a new twist to it, if you like. It was different from the group, but of course then you have to get that name well known. It takes a while. So it was a bit slow getting it listened to.
Well, we love Steve Hackett. He's been on our show here before, and like you, he took the pain of something horrible, losing somebody, with his song Every Day, which is a beautiful song. It's an amazing song. So it's a gift that Jackson and I wish we possessed, which is to take what you're feeling and turn it into music and something that can be shared so other people can not only hear it, but maybe they can relate to something in their own personal life to what you're going through. We can't do that. That's why we talk about it on our show and we write about it and things like that.
I know, but it's always a big source of inspiration, if you've been through something like that. And I'm probably going to do more songs about it all anyway, because it's such a change, it's such a life-changing thing. And as a writer, that's the sort of thing that spurs you on, to write more and more songs.
And that's a kind of a great thing too. The fact that you've had this career that's been long and you've had a lot of hits, but you still have that desire to write new music. You still have that inspiration.
Yeah.
It's still the spark is still there. That's what's really impressive.
Well, it's sort of, you can't get away from it. There's stuff going on in your head the whole time. Oh, there's another idea. There's another tune. And just getting it all together.
Keep them coming.
Yeah, keep them coming. That's for sure. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you think about cancel culture, because I just saw that our buddy Mick Wall was on BBC having to defend the song Fat Bottom Girls by Queen, because apparently it's been removed from like a greatest hits compilation, or you can't download it or something like that because some fat bottom girls find it offensive. And I'm like, well, this song has been out for 45 years, and I start to think, well, what else could they cancel? I'm thinking, oh, what about Good Morning Little Schoolgirl? Somebody could be like, oh, you can't sing that song, I'm like, but wait, but that's been around forever. And that was a cover in the first place, wasn't it? So like, you can't cancel this stuff. What in the world? But how do you feel about that kind of thing?
I don't know. That's really funny to me. I mean, where do you actually draw the line?
Exactly.
Because there must be hundreds, as you say. There must be hundreds of songs like that. The more you dig them out, I don't know. That's quite bizarre, isn't it?
Good morning, little schoolgirl. Good morning, little schoolgirl. Can I go home, babe? Oh, won't you let me go home with you so I can hug, squeeze, squeeze. If you let me, I can tease you, baby.
It is to me, and like Dean Martin's daughter likes to sing Baby It's Cold Outside. They're like, oh, well, you got to stop singing that because that's about a guy who won't let a girl go because he's trying to get with her. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? It's a flirty little fun song, You can't cancel everything.
And that was that Beatles song, was it? Little children, don't you tell on me, or whatever.
Yeah.
Loads of them.
What's that about? There's some fat bottom girls out there who love the song, but they're celebrated with it. Like, yeah, here I am, come and get me, It's, I don't know. I just kind of wanted to see what a veteran's take on that might be.
Well, hopefully that's not going to be a big thing, which would be really silly.
One would hope.
That would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Carl Palmer, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf.
I mean, since we have you here, we've got to talk a little bit about the Yardbirds days. And I feel like the rest of the band, and by the rest of the band, I mean you and Paul and Chris and Keith, don't get your due because you had these three guitar player guys who I guess were pretty good. And they went on to do a few things after the Yardbirds. But, the band was tight and you went from being kind of a blues band to a psychedelic band. And yes, you changed guitar players, but you didn't really make a whole lot of other changes. That's because you had talent. And I don't feel like you guys get the credit that you deserve. Do you feel the same way? Or is it like, well, look, those other guys bring us attention and then we get our just rewards in other ways?
Well, yeah, I think as time goes by, the more people look into it, like you, they find, oh, they were all quite clever in this band. Each of them were pretty good. And of course, the thing about the Yardbirds, I tell everybody, is that we were a team. We were all a team, and we all needed each other. We were all part of the team to make that happen. And nobody was any better than any of the others, really.
Right.
There might have been a team leader, but we worked as a team, and we worked off the chemistry. And I think that shows a lot in those old songs,
For your love, for your love, for your love, I'd give you everything and more, and that's for sure.
And it's interesting too for us to who kind of came into it late in the kind of the 80s and then into the 90s to think that at one point in time Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page were just kids. I mean, they weren't, who we knew them as later on in life. I mean, you described Jeff Beck coming in as, this guy with a greasy jacket and greasy hair. And, he was 21, 22-year-old kid. I mean, had the talent, but didn't have the repertoire yet.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, they were all learning how to do it, that you could see. Mm-hmm. And Clapton was making sure he had the right clothes, and he was practicing in front of the mirror, make sure he looked good. It was all early days, and but we all needed each other. We needed him, and he needed us. Really, to get somewhere.
Yeah. So when you made the transition from Clapton to when Jeff Beck came in, was it a conscious decision to move in a different direction, or was it kind of you took how he could play and went with that?
Yeah, it just happened. We didn't really know what he was like until he started to play, and he played in a different way altogether. He was very, very inspirational, and he played the same things as Eric, but he played much more, a much wider scope,
Right.
And he had different tastes as well. You know, he wasn't stuck in the blues. You know, he liked Les Paul and he liked Barney Kessel and all that stuff as well. You know, it was different. But I think it was him that actually gave the Yardbirds that what they call psychedelic sound. You know.
Yeah, I think he was the first one to use the fuzz box, or the ones that I guess is credited for that, and that kind of led to a whole different style of music. Would there have been the Pink Floyd psychedelic without you guys?
Yeah, it was funny because Keith Relf's dad, he used to be the road manager at one time. And we used to say, "Oh, what do you think of Jeff?" And he said, "Oh, well, he's just a box of tricks." Which are all his pedals and everything, But he loved all those different sounds. That's the thing about Jeff, and he could play them. He could get them into the songs.
Well, he really could, yeah. And I was fortunate enough to see him at Royal Albert Hall last year, one of his last shows in London. Did you guys stay in touch? What was the last time you had spoken with him before he passed?
Well, it was a while actually. I lost. Yeah, I did lose touch with him for a while. I went to his wedding, whenever that was. Okay. I think that was a good 10 years ago. But no, I didn't talk to him again more recently, not for a while. But it was a great shock, of course, when he died. It was just completely out of the blue.
And I know, well, if she had me back again, well, I would never make her sad. I got a heart full of soul.
A terrible loss for us all. But in looking back now, I mean, of course, Jackson and I were talking a little bit about this before you came on. In 1963, nobody thought, well, the Rolling Stones will be doing this 60 years from now. Everyone's like, okay, in 18 months, no one's going to remember them. Or in 2 years, that's it. That's the tops. So a lot of people lament, oh, the Yardbirds, they really only had a 5 or 6 year run. But I'm like, but look at what they did in that 5 or 6 years. Look at all the tours they did. I mean, Jimmy was in the band, was it 18 months? And you did 4 tours of America during that time? You guys were working like crazy. Stuff they wouldn't do today.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't happen now, does it? I think that was part of the thing that stopped us in the end. It was total burnout. We'd been playing 4 or 5 years full pelt. It was very tough at the end of that.
I can imagine. But what was it like coming to America? I hear stories about growing up in war-torn Britain in the 50s and the early 60s. There's still rubble everywhere. It's like coming from Britain to America is like going from black and white to Technicolor in the 60s. Was it like that for you all?
Yes, exactly. Yes. As you say, we played on the bomb sites, near where we lived, and it was all very foggy and very dark, and then we'd see all these movies, John Wayne movies and Hollywood films and things like 77 Sunset Strip, and James Cagney films and all that, and that was all part of the American culture, and it was so exciting, to suddenly come over there and wow. Everything expanded tenfold.
It was exciting until you figured out how far it was from point A to point B here.
On a bus.
Well, exactly. When you looked on the map to see where we were going to go before we took off, oh my God, thousands of miles.
That's right. Yeah. And but there's one tour in particular I wanted to ask you about, because obviously, we're a little younger. We didn't get to see you guys in the heyday, but there was a tour that you did. I think it was opening for the Stones, but also Ike and Tina
Yeah.
were on that tour as well. It sounded like an amazing time. I'm like, the Yardbirds opened for the Stones? The Yardbirds were awesome. They don't need to open for the Stones. But I know they're a bigger name. I get it. They've had more hits or whatever. But I'm like, but then with Ike and Tina tour, that must have been a heck of a time. Do you have any great memories of that?
Yeah, that was exciting. It wasn't a great deal of dates, but it was all around England.
Mm-hmm.
But a great lineup, really good lineup. And I remember one, as you say, the Yardbirds played with the Stones. I remember one night we played before the Stones, and we got loads and loads of encores.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stones were about to go on, and of course they had to wait for quite a long time because everyone was shouting more and more. We don't want to see the Stones. So it must have been quite tough for them actually on that particular night. I remember that.
That's cool. Now, what about the transition? I mean, you guys kind of did a lot of singles, I feel like, in the early 60s. You weren't necessarily an album band, although you released some albums. You were more of a singles band. And then eventually, and obviously we have Roger the Engineer and some of those, great albums that have come out later. You would have to get something like this, like a big collection to get all of your singles, to get all the songs into one place, because you didn't make that many albums. Was that a conscious thing, or was that the record company decided not to do a lot of albums, or why was that?
Well, it was basically a singles market. Okay. In those days, up to 1969 or something like that. You did your single, and then 3 months' time you did another one, and that was the way it went. And albums didn't really sell so much until Zeppelin came along, and Jethro Tull and all those album orientated bands. Mm-hmm. And then so we ended up with those sort of compilations with a mishmash of singles and outtakes and album tracks,
and even guitar players. Yeah.
Yes.
Just teach me to despise. Well, time make man more wise. Here, within my own refrain, my eyes just hurt.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that I really caught me when I was going through the history was you guys got to record at the Sun Studios with Sam Phillips.
Yeah,
that must have been a huge, growing up with the American, R&B and rock and roll, to get to meet him and record there must have been something special.
Well, yes, that was. We had to wait as well. I remember getting there very early, something like 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and he was on a fishing trip, and he didn't get back until about 10 or 11. But we waited for him, and he came in, and he was a real character. And wow, this guy's worked with Elvis and Howlin' Wolf and Jerry Lee Lewis and everyone, and that was good. That was great. He said, "Oh yes, it's a pretty good band." He said, "But I don't know about the singer because waiting for him to come, we'd all been in the pub." The bar around the corner, and Keith was a little bit drunk by that time, and of course it came out in his vocals. So Sam had a bit of a go at him. Oh, you'll have to get a new singer.
How about that? I'll tell you, the first time I think I ever saw you all, at least as the Yardbirds, was in the 80s. Late night on TV, there was a movie called Blow Up.
Oh, yes.
Which featured you and the Animals. And I think they just kind of clipped in the Beatles at some point. I don't think the Beatles did anything special for the movie. They just said, well, if you're going to do this, you got to have the Beatles in there somewhere. So they just kind of popped them in there, them being a huge draw, obviously. But I felt like you and like the Animals, and seeing Eric Burdon walk around the soundstage singing House of the Rising Sun with his guys behind him, I just thought it was funny. But to see you guys looked cool in it. I'm like, what was that experience like? You're going to be in a movie. Was that just unheard of? You're psyched about it? It was like, no, this is just another thing we've got to do because we've got 8 gigs this week and this is just one of them.
Well, that was what happened. You know, you didn't know what you were doing. You might be doing a gig or a recording, or might be doing a photo shoot, you know, or, we're doing a movie now. So we never knew, but we took it all as it came, you know, and it was all it was all promo for the band. And a lot of those films were good fun, but Blow Up particularly was quite strange, because we ended up spending about 5 days doing about 5 minutes of a shot of a film, you know, which was quite odd.
Yes, must have been. We really appreciate you being on with us here this morning for us, this afternoon for you, and want to wish you all the best with the new single. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find your single, which I believe is out September 15th, and you mentioned the cruise next year, but tell them what you're up to, where they can see you.
Well, yes, I'm doing the cruise next year, the Flower Power Cruise again, which we'd already done this year, but next year again, which is great. I think we're on from Puerto Rico to Miami on that one. And you can download my single. Is just download only. The first time I've had a download single. So I guess it's the usual, you know, Spotify, Deezer, all the download channels, whatever it is. So look for that. Look for that on there. Probably Spotify.
Very good. And you can go to jimmccarty.com to learn more about Jim, his career in the past, present, and future there. And we hope we do get more great releases from you over time, Jim. Thank you so much for being on. Jackson, you have any final questions for Mr. Jim McCarty?
Yeah, only just thank you so much for being with us. It was a great conversation, and the best of luck to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers.
What a nice man, and just so genial and happy to talk, you know. We've come up, we revisit this time and time again, why we are so big fans of the guys from the UK. Just an absolute delight. Somebody who is a titan of the, you know, rock and roll era. You know, the Yardbirds are so big, influenced so many people, and just a down to earth guy. Just, you know, happy to talk about anything, happy to talk about anybody in the band. Didn't want to make it all about him. Yeah.
Fantastic.
We didn't get into Mickey Most, but maybe that was a good thing.
Well, in the reading that I did, it sounded like that was just a bad fit. And I'd rather not talk to somebody about bad times unless they bring it up and want to get into it. No, thanks.
That's right. I guess I could have asked him about Peter Grant, because he did manage the Yardbirds at the very end there, you know, and like this Yardbirds 68 live album that Jimmy put out, I want to say it was about 5 years ago that he put that out. How does he feel about that? You know, but he kind of touched on that. It's like, you know, there's a lot of compilations that have come out, like they come out all the time.
Yeah.
Because that's just the kind of way it is. I mean, the Beatles were making albums in the early to mid 60s. The Stones were making albums. Yes, that single's important, but you know, the Who were kind of more like them, as they did a lot of singles and they did fewer albums. But I was just kind of curious about that. Like, if you can get a collection of 10 or 12 great songs, why not put out an album? But he's right. I mean, singles drove everything.
Yeah, and I think what you were talking about before, they thought there was going to be an endless supply of these. You know, as soon as band A got to be a little stale, they just bring in the next person to come along. Right. There wasn't that thought of having, you know, decades-long careers.
I mean, there really wasn't. I mean, no one thought about it. I mean, a lot of them would say, yeah, I'll do this for a couple years, and then I'll, you know, have to go get a real job. I mean, there's some who had the vision. I don't think Eric Clapton ever wanted a real job. I think as soon as he figured out how to play the guitar, he's like, this is it. I got to figure out how to do this forever. But not everyone did.
Yeah. And he was talking about Jeff Beck and his, you know, box of toys that he brought with him. And maybe not something to get into at this point in time, but just with Jim, but just thinking about how, like, somebody like an Eric Clapton, especially now when you think about him, yeah, he plays the guitar, but he also sings, you know, and Beck doesn't do that. So for him, I think the guitar was much more of a voice than something to go along with the voice.
Same with Jimmy.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. With the the bow and the what he did, it was kind of the same thing. That was going to be that they knew that was their instrument. They weren't also going to do anything else.
Yeah, and I think Clapton just became a singer out of necessity, really. I mean, he did some singing in Cream, and then it's like, okay, well, now I'm out of Cream. Now in Blind Faith, we got Steve. I don't need to sing. Then you're out of Blind Faith. It's like, okay, I'm going to go solo. I'll be Eric Clapton. Well, someone's got to be singing, I'm sitting center stage. So, but it's so cool that Jim is such a nice singer. He's got a very nice, like he says, it's a folk voice, right? You're not going to have him out screaming in front of, huge row of speakers like a Mick Jagger or something like that. But for the stuff that he plays on acoustic, Walking in the Wild Land, it's a great record. And this new one, Breath of the Wind, is a lovely song, and he sings it very well. And I've got to ask Hugh a little bit about how he decided to produce that, because he, as Jim said, he took a little while to do it, but the end result was très magnifique.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear the other side of that story, from the production side, absolutely, and especially from somebody who, when we read that, he's an artist, he's a graphic artist. No, he can also produce and do other things as well.
He has talent beyond what the box that you want to put him in. The box of frogs you want to put him in.
And that was an interesting concept too, because we talked about, like, should Black Sabbath have come back as something else, and Van Halen changed their name. You've got that built-in legacy that you can go off of, but you also want to do something new. So interesting that they decided to do Box of Frogs and not just say Yardbirds or New Yardbirds or whatever it was, to capitalize, because then you don't have any of that baggage with you. You can do whatever you want.
And I'm sure there are also legal reasons too. Like I think
probably
Jimmy owned the name, and if Peter Grant was still alive then, which I believe he was, he wouldn't have relinquished that easy, so it's like, all right, look, we don't need the name. We know what we want to go do. Let's just go do it, Such a gentleman, Jim McCarty of the Yardbirds, and a real dream come true for me and Jackson. I mean, if you had told us when we met as teenagers more than 30 years ago in college that one day we'd be interviewing a member of the Yardbirds on our own, what we all would only know it as a radio show, wouldn't have known what a podcast was back then, but we'd have been over the moon. We'd have freaked out. We probably would have stopped with all the economics courses and just dropped that and started doing a radio show at the college. And maybe we should have. But the Yardbirds were a huge influence on me, especially after getting that Eric Clapton Crossroads box set, which we talk about at length. What was that, episodes 35 and 36, something like that. Huge influence on me. Of course, then I pushed it on Jackson, and he got it. He's like, okay, this is the blues. This is kind of where it all came from. Plus, of course, the classic Eric Clapton, then Jeff Beck, then Jimmy Page lineup. But that's not to minimize the talent from Paul Samwell-Smith, Chris Dreja, the late Keith Relf, and of course, Jim McCarty. We thank him so much for being on. And you need to go out there and download and purchase his new single, Breath of the Wind. Beautiful song about his late wife, Lizzie. And the real Yardbird fan can catch him on the Flower-Powered Cruise this spring. Go to jimmccarty.com to learn about everything that Jim's been up to, his time in the Yardbirds, his time in Renaissance, his own band, where he's going to be. Super nice man, gentleman, member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we thank you, Jim, for coming on the show. And as usual, folks, we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? Hey, you let us know. Email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. But you can get us on social media. It's at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72 on Twitter. That's probably the best. But we're also on the new threads. We're also on Instagram under different handles. We got a YouTube page. Maybe we're on Facebook, but you let us know how the Yardbirds have affected your rock and roll fandom, your rock and roll appreciation over the decades. Make sure you download and subscribe to get the show every week. And if you're thinking about it, guys, hey, give us a positive review. Thanks to positive reviews and growing the show to find more rock and roll fans like you, we get to have people like Jim McCarty on the show. So if you're a listener, we appreciate you. We appreciate you helping us grow our show. Do us a favor, give us a positive review, and help us get even better. Thank you to Pantheon Podcast, of which we are a proud member. And be sure you run out to rarevinyl.com, guys. Use the code UGLY. Save yourself 10%. They've got a lot of Yardbird stuff, but they've got a lot of everything. Whatever you need, whatever you're looking for, it's rarevinyl.com. Use code UGLY. Save 10%. Gonna be hard to top that for next week. But we don't get Rock and Roll Hall of Fame members on every single week of the show. I'm sorry to say, we're just not quite there yet. but we're doing our best, and we've still got a lot of fun stuff coming up for this fall. So be sure you download and subscribe, and to all you rockers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.